before we kind of like get into the meat of everything, like I feel like I need to set the stage. Like there needs to be some setting up that happens, because I feel like there's been some really strong paradigms that have surrounded VFX education. And I feel like those paradigms or those false beliefs have really been holding people back in a lot of ways. And I feel like I need to get in there and like really dismantle some of these false beliefs before we can figure out a way to go forward. So if you guys have ever, I know I have an international audience. I know part of my childhood is this Jenga game. It's this idea where you have these stack of blocks that you can start pulling pieces of these blocks. Everyone takes a turn, and then at some point the whole thing falls down. So like this presentation is going to be a little bit like this Jenga game. And it's what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling out some of these false beliefs about VFX education. And then at some point, the tower is going to fall. And when it falls, if it does fall for you, then like the lights are going to be turned on and you're going to see things differently. And so as I'm going through, I want you guys to be able to notice that moment, because it's at that moment that you're going to be free to be able to chart your course forward. You're going to be able to see that there's been some things holding you back that you didn't know before. And if that happens, I would just love if you could just put it in the chat box and say, "Oh, my tower just fell." Okay. So watch out for that moment. I feel like I've been on a journey through my VFX career. And as I've done that, things have been made clear to me. Like I've been able to see some things. And so I want to convey that to you so you have a clear path forward. Okay. So watch out for that moment. Say, my tower fell. Okay. So I'm just going to come out and say it, and it may be just a bit controversial to say this. As I'm looking at people's polls, there's people have a variety of feelings about their education, if it be online or at a university. But my belief is that visual effects education, like if that be a physical location or online, that they don't really care if you succeed. So I know that that's a bit of a bold statement, but I am going to illustrate that through this presentation. And I'm gonna see if I can. If you don't believe that right now, I'm gonna see if I can win you over to how I see things here. So, so to kind of illustrate this idea that visual effects places of learning of visual effects don't really care if you succeed or not, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, okay? And I want you to kind of put yourself into this story and just kind of imagine yourself like you were here, okay? So you're a person, you've always wanted to learn how to do this thing. Whatever this thing is, this has been a passion in your life, and you're walking down the street and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to learn how to do this thing, but I love it and I want to know how to do it. And you see this building and it has a big sign, and the sign says, we're going to teach you how to do this thing, whatever this thing is that you want to do. And you go, okay. You go in, you talk to the person at the desk, and they say, great, we are going to teach you how to do this thing. And come on back. And they take you into this room, and it's this like vast library of resources. And it's amazing. And there's just hallway after hallway and room after room. It's a bit of a maze of resources. And as you're sitting there, you're like, they're leaving you, and you're sitting there and you're like, wait, I'm not exactly sure how to start. I don't know if I know enough about how to do this thing to get started. But they left, and you're like, okay, well, I'm here. And you feel energetic and you're optimistic and you're like, okay, great. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to start, like figuring out how to do this thing. And so the first thing that you do is you go find some librarians, and you're like, hey, librarians, can you teach me how to do this thing? And they're like, well, I'm sorry, we're just librarians. We don't really we don't really do the thing that you want to do. We're just here managing resources and teaching stuff, and we can point you in a general direction. And then they point you to like 10 different areas. You're like, there's, the West Wing and the East Wing, and there's the cellar, and there's all these different places. And so you come to find out that you're like, okay, well, as I'm going through this, and even though I'm interacting with these librarians, nobody really seems to know how to do this thing that I'm asking. Okay. And then you go through the first area and you find a book, and it's kind of like a children's book, but it talks about your subject, and it's really surface information. It doesn't give you a lot of depth to it. And so you're like, oh gosh, that's not any good. And so, and then what you do is you get to another resource, and you're like, I need something more complex. And then you go through that and you're like, oh my gosh, this book that I'm reading is just so crazy in depth that I only understand 10% of it. I feel totally lost. So like one is like too surface and the other one is like too complex. And then you go to another one and it like completely contradicts all of the resources that you had looked at before. So that's a little bit frustrating, right? And so, and you're wondering, at some point, you're wondering about what your experience is like. You're like, why does it have to be this way? Because I feel like I'm spending a lot of time just kind of spinning my wheels and not really figuring things out. And I know that there's people out there that know how to do this thing. Like they exist. It's just that, where are they? I don't know where they are. I can't talk to them. They don't seem available. And then you kind of come to this realization that you're like, wait a minute. I was promised that I was going to be taught how to do this thing. And then after a while, you start, this person starts to feel a little bit of rage and then says, oh my gosh, I feel a little bit scammed here, because I came into this thing saying, this is what I was going to do. And I feel like I've been, sold a bill of goods that haven't been very good. Okay. So, I tell you this story because this is what I feel like education is right now to be a visual effects artist. It's really fragmented. It's disjointed. In some places, it's like completely contradictory. And, you have professors and teachers. I have professors and teachers that I absolutely love. But as well-intended as they are, they're like the librarians in the story, and they're like, we don't really do the thing that you want, but we can point you in the general direction of where you should go. And so that doesn't really help you in your journey. It kind of gets you in the direction, but it leaves a big gap. And so maybe you feel like you can relate to this story. Maybe you could feel like this person in the story where you felt a little bit of rage and frustration. Like, why does it have to be this way? And I'm telling you this story and I'm asking you to relate to this story and all that kind of stuff. But in reality, this is actually my story. This is what happened to me trying to get into visual effects. So what had happened is that as I was coming out of my graduate or undergraduate degree, and funnily enough, it's in animation, right? Of all things, like I'm a matte painting and environments person, but I had an education in animation, which wasn't, anyways. You know how it goes. So I'm finishing up with my undergraduate degree, and I am. I'm trying to figure out what the next thing to do is, because I don't feel prepared to enter into visual effects. I had put out my resume, I didn't get anything. And so I'm like, okay, what's the next logical step? The next logical step, of course, is graduate school, right? So that's going to bridge the gap. Like, I'm down here with my undergraduate degree, and then my graduate degree is going to be the thing that fills the gap between my job, because there's this space here. And so I go through all these different resources online, and I look at the master's programs at all these art schools. And so I pick one out. I said, this is the one, right? And I go to all of the teachers there. So I go and I visit the school. This is the place This is the school. I'm going to go visit all the professors before I write my name on the line and start going to this school. So I showed them my reel. I talked to them about what I wanted and my plan. And I was absolutely floored with the response that I had received from them. And I talked to multiple professors, and they all said the same thing, which was, I don't think we can help you. I think you better just get a job. And I was like, I was absolutely floored to like go to a master's program, and me coming out of an undergraduate program, they said they couldn't help me. They didn't have enough experience or knowledge, or and that I should just go get a job. That just absolutely floored me. And I came out of that experience feeling like the system was broken, like something is wrong. Like, why do I not feel prepared? Why am I not prepared to get into visual effects? And why does the master's program not prepare me to get into visual effects? So I felt like the system was kind of broken and a little bit sick. But, for me, I had some kind of like this like random chance of getting in the visual effects industry. I was able to take that. I was able to make it good. It was in the direction that I wanted. And they say like getting into visual effects is like walking in wet sand, as far as like the trailblazers are all walking in wet sand. The person that walked in the wet sand, as soon as they make that path, you look back and all the water is just kind of sunken in all of the steps, And so it's like these chances of getting in the visual effects industry is just like these random one-off chances, and then once that path has been blazed, it's gone again, right? And so that's kind of how it was for me. And I thought that I was going to leave this kind of, what I would say, this kind of wasteland of learning, this labyrinth, this maze labyrinth that I had been going through in my education, kind of trying to find my way. And I thought I would leave that forever because I'm like, now I'm a visual effects artist. I don't have to be there anymore. That's great. Until I got involved with MPC. So MPC contacted me and said, hey, we need you to build the 3D DMP Academy and the environments program at MPC for our academy. And just as a bit of a sidebar, if you don't know what the MPC Academy is, it's a 12 to 14 week program. It's full-time, it's paid. Once you graduate, you move on to the VFX floor as a full-fledged artist, and you finish off your contract for a year. So it's a pretty sweet deal. So not only did I create the program, train in the program, but I also recruited for the program. So in my efforts for recruiting, I found myself in a peculiar situation because I thought that I had left completely the this kind of labyrinth of learning, this kind of wasteland of learning experience, and then I was back there again. And I was going through this, but instead of like trying to find my way into visual effects, I was trying to go through this library and find people that were qualified to work in visual effects as a recruiter. And so I had a really hard time actually finding enough people to staff these 3D DMP academies, people that were qualified. And just to give you context, you have like your your undergraduate or graduate program here, and then up here you have a junior level position, and then they've lowered the bar and included trainee. And then even between graduate and trainee, I had a hard time finding people that where that met up. Okay. And so, I, as I've gone through this experience, I felt a bit of rage at the VFX education and how it's being done, and how it's not meeting the needs of students, up-and-coming artists. It's not meeting the needs of visual effects studios either, because it wasn't meeting my needs as a recruiter. So I've been on both sides, and my conclusion is that there's something that's broken in all of this, and I felt like it's sick, and there needs to be a cure, right? And I keep asking myself, why does it have to be this way, right? And so what I have done is I've tried to find the cure, and I've tried to find the cure in the VFX Horde, and I feel like that the VFX Horde is the solution. Its goal is to fill the gap between graduation and full-time employment, right? Because we all experience that. We get our education, and if there is a gap, that needs to be filled somehow. How is that going to be filled? I feel like VFX Horde is the solution, okay? So the really interesting thing though is that the VFX Horde, as I started this project and I'm getting it going and putting resources out there, then I found that the VFX Horde is kind of in this weird, awkward position where it's kind of sandwiched in between mainstream educators that have propagated a culture that is not helpful to getting people jobs, I believe, and then students who have grown to love these institutions that have mistreated them for so long. And so it's kind of this weird thing. So not only does the VFX Horde have to like change minds about how how to do education and create a better training experience, but it's like there's like a culture shift that has to happen, and it's like moving away from like this university model style education to something better, and then to try to convince people of that. So like I said, there's like the better training experience, but then it's also trying to go against the mainstream and people that are locked into these unhelpful paradigms about how to teach VFX education. And so I feel like the VFX Horde has created, and I'm going to be talking to you about a little experiment that I've done that I believe shows that the VFX Horde has created a better training experience that will lead to people to employment. But the real battle, I feel like, is trying to change people's minds and trying to go counterculture, because that's kind of what we're doing here. And just to say that it's not just myself that feels like VFX education is broken. Everybody that's worked in a visual effects studio realizes that. Recruiters realize that. And as hard as they try to work with institutions, places of learning, it's very difficult to get them to respond to the needs of the VFX industry. So, okay. So I'm going to play a video for you here. So just to kind of set this up. So, knowing that the visual effects industry was kind of broken, and I wanted to be able to come up with a solution to it. So what I ended up doing is I created a training methodology, and I wanted to test it. I felt like this was the solution. I wanted to test this training methodology on actual people and see what the results would be. So I took 11 students over a 4-month period of time, and I trained them. And this is like the body of their work, the accumulation of their work. And it's using the VFX Horde training methodology. And what I ended up doing is I took this, I cut it into a reel, and I sent it to 38 visual effects professionals. I sent it to them, and these are people that are VFX supervisors. They are recruiters. They are like department leads, and everybody that's involved in the hiring process. I sent this to, and that spans about 15 different studios. That's like Weta and Disney and ILM and MPC. And so all the major studios are represented in my little experiment here. And I asked them 2 questions. So there's more of this video. If you want to go over to central.vfxhorde.com, there's an article, 5 ways to get into visual effects. I believe it's something called like that. If you go on that, it has a little bit of a breakdown, and you can watch this video. So, but I'm going to just, for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So the experiment, like I said, 11 students, 38 visual effects professionals across 15 different studios. Okay, so the questions that I asked, I had 2 questions that I asked that I wanted data back from. And the first one was, if someone were to apply to your studio with this demo reel, would you want to interview them? So the answer to that question was 100% yes. Every single person did, okay? The second question was, how does this demo reel compare to other junior demo reels that you see? And the vast majority of them said it was much, much better, okay? So my conclusion coming from that is that I had created a training model that was vastly better than what was currently available, okay? And it's kind of funny because, and you're like, what is the secret? How was it done? You know, it's like, it's like I could say that it's stupidly simple, you know? And when I tell you the big secret, you're going to be like, well, of course. Okay. And this is the big secret. Create a training experience that simulates a VFX studio. That's it. That's all you got to do. Like that is what needs to happen in order for people to have the kind of training experience that's relevant enough for them to be able to jump right in from that training experience into being a productive worker at a job, okay? And I'm not sure why it's taken so long or why universities keep going the way they do, or online educators, because I can say you have this university model of how things are being done, and online training, they pick that up. So you have universities, and then you have VFX studios, and online training, which is often used as kind of a stopgap, like something that will fill this gap. And instead of siding with the studios and providing a studio training experience, they often side with the universities and say, I'm going to provide another university experience for people, okay? And so that's what a lot of online educators of VFX often end up doing. So I feel pretty strongly about this, and this is really the motivation behind the VFX Horde, is to provide this better experience. So, and I can just kind of pull people right now, and I just kind of want to say, you know, I told you I was going to be like pulling out these little Jenga blocks here, and hopefully change some perceptions about VFX education. So is anybody having that kind of experience now? Is anybody having an eye-opening experience? Maybe your eyes have been open for a long time already, and you already know all these problems because you've been living it. Okay, so I do want to draw like a distinction between the cultural differences between the university model and the VFX Horde, or a studio training model. Okay, and so so it's common at universities to have the grading of assignments, right? You do your assignment, you pass it in, and then your professor looks at it and says, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C. You know, the standards that they're using aren't necessarily based in VFX standards. They're based on the university standards. And so but you just get a grade and then you're done. And then you get an accumulation of all of your work, and that gets put together, and then you get a grade at the end. So that's very, very different than the rigors of taking your work through the approval process. Because at a visual effects studio, you show your work, they look at it, and they say, that's not right, fix this, fix this, fix this. And then it gets kicked back to you. You go and you fix those things, you go back, and they say, that's great, but this is still broken over here, and it gets kicked back to you. And so it's this process of going through this review funnel process where it gets down farther and farther, it gets reviewed, less and less things have to change, and then it gets down at the bottom, and then it gets approved, okay? That's very different than the grading process. Okay, so following tutorials. There's a lot of universities that have locked into tutorial-based learning, and um, you know, like where you're just following instructions. It says click this, I click this, click this, do this. You know, that's very different at a Visual Effects Studio because there's not really any tutorials to follow. I mean, you might have some online documentation at a Visual Effects Studio, which you will experience, and you will say, I remember Garrett said that online documentation at Visual Effects Studios are some of the worst documentation ever, and they're not really a great resource at times. And so they're not great. They're not maintained great typically. And so you don't really have a lot to go off of at the Visual Effects Studio. There's not a lot of people online that have really experienced the workflow of that Visual Effects Studio. And so you're left to rely on your problem solving skills. And if your university has set you up to be a tutorial person to follow instructions, then you get into that kind of visual effects environment and you feel absolutely like you're drowning. The teacher-student relationship, okay? That's like, you know, the teacher knowledgeable, teaching the student, and the grading of assignments and all that kind of stuff is very, very different than the relationship between a client and a service provider, because you have a client, which is the studio that you're doing the visual effects work, the director, the VFX supervisor, and you are a service provider. And so what doesn't often happen is that these institutions don't do anything to teach you how to be a service provider, about how to have good customer service. That's just not part of the teacher-student relationship, but it's very much a part of the client service provider or artist relationship that you have. Oftentimes, the universities will require a lot of generalist education. So that's like, I mean, if you're getting far out into the weeds, which I think we've all experienced if you've been to a university, you're like philosophy classes and like math classes and all these other classes that have nothing to do with visual effects. And you're like, as soon as I pass this class, I can forget everything and move on to what I really want. But then also, like in visual effects, you know, if you're going to be a compositor, they're like, well, we really need you to learn how to rig something, you know? We need you to go through this rigging course or this modeling course, or you're like, I'm never, ever going to use this as a compositor, but they give you this generalist education that's very different and does not reflect the need in the industry. The need in the industry is for people to be precise in their discipline. And so some people, they come out of universities having a very generalist education, knowing a little bit about everything, and the studios need people to be very focused in one thing, and they could care less about some other things, some other aspects of VFX education. Okay, so that's some of the major cultural differences between the university model that, like I said, has been adopted by a lot of online teaching, and what happens actually in VFX Studios. And the VFX Horde is on the side of VFX Studios, not on the side of universities. Okay, so this is how, and now we're kind of getting into the meat of how description of the program at the VFX Horde. Okay, so the really one of the elements here is this idea of milestones. Okay, and the example that I'm using here is for 3D DMP. So the idea is that you can achieve milestones, and once you achieve a milestone, you'll get access to the next milestone. And the faster you can, there's no limit to how fast you can get through these milestones, okay? So this is for 3D DMP. The first milestone is color workflow and pipeline. So once you get through that milestone, you get access to the next milestone, concept and DMP integration, okay? That's the Photoshop DMP section, the 2D part of matte painting. Then there's camera projections, okay? Then there is shot work, which has 3 parts. So for sequence 1, sequence 2, and sequence 3. So those last 3 milestones in progression, getting more and more difficult in the shot work that's required, that's where the majority of the demo reel pieces are going to be coming from for your demo reel, so that when you come out of the VFX Horde, you not only have the skills and ability, you have a demo reel that shows your skills and ability, and you have the confidence to be able to thrive at a visual effects studio. So that's the goal. And this is part of the accountability part, is to pass you through these milestones. And so there's a couple different elements to this. So what we have here is that each milestone has a training component to it. So that's either going to be in written documentation, master courses, or sequence training. And if you're following the VFX Horde, then you are familiar with master courses, because many of you are probably signed up for the Camera Projection Bootcamp and are familiar with the color workflow for VFX artists and where that's at. And the sequence training. And the sequence training is like shot work. So that's like giving you access to all the footage that you would need, all the tracked cameras, all the 3D assets, the photography, just giving you everything that you would need, just like you were at a visual effects studio. So if you sit down at a visual effects studio, you're not expected to go out and shoot your own plates, your own footage, right? That's just delivered to you. You don't have to worry about that section, that part of the process. And that's what the sequence training is all about. That's the really heavy visual effects studio simulated part of this training. So to get through a milestone, the first part of that is the training part, and that's done in a variety of ways. The next thing is a task, is to be able to show the mastery of a topic that hits a VFX Studio standard. Okay, so that's to represent that you have been able to master some of these concepts, and then it's quality control. So there's a third component there, is that in order for you to pass through a milestone, you have to be able to show your work to a VFX Horde lead, and that's going to be done in either dailies or rounds. So I sent out a video earlier this week talking about the review room. The review room is the VFX Horde's own review tool, which is the same kind of tool that's used in all the visual effects studios. That's how work gets finalized. You work on something, you submit your work, it goes up into the review room system, and then your lead or a VFX supervisor reviews your work, gives you feedback, and then notes are added to your submissions. You go back and change it. So that's how things are done at a visual effects studio. So that's the same way that you progress through your milestones. You have to be able to show your work. It's going to get kicked back to you multiple times until it hits the standards of a visual effects studio. Okay, so that's the accountability part of all of this. Okay, so I want you to take this idea of milestones and combine it with this idea of reverse or inverted scholarships. Okay, because I'm interested in rewarding people that work hard, that are excited about working in visual effects, that are talented, right? And I think those people should be rewarded. And also especially people that are like that, but don't have the financial means, right? Those people especially. So to draw this contrast to you about what a reverse scholarship is, it's this idea that you have, I'm going to describe to you what a traditional scholarship is. So everybody knows what a scholarship is, right? It's you get a discount on your education up front, and it's an effort to try to get you into their program, right? Once the universities have you in that program, they're very happy for you to just live there forever, right? And there are people out there that are like that. They're professional students, right? They just kind of live in their program and they're minoring and everything, and so universities like that. They just kind of cash in on all of this money that you're bringing in. So in contrast to that, the VFX Horde has a reverse scholarship, and I'm going to try to explain this concept to you. And it's that you get a discount on your education at the end instead of the beginning, and it's all intended to try to get you out of the program as quickly as possible. So traditional scholarships, they try to get you into the program as quickly as possible. VFX Horde is trying to get you out of the program as quickly as possible and into a job, okay? So the incentives are reversed. So that's why it's a reverse scholarship. So this is how it's done. So there's no limit, there's no time limit on how long you should be in a milestone. You can get through your milestones as quickly as possible, okay? There's no limit on that. And because, like I've told you earlier and through emails and stuff like that, the training that I'm proposing here is subscription-based. So if there's no limit on how quickly you go through the milestones and it's based on a subscription, that means the faster you get through your milestones, the more of a discount you get on your education, okay? So I believe that this is a good model because it helps people. Not only is it more affordable because it's a subscription, but it rewards people to get out of the program as quickly as possible, because we don't want you in the program forever. We love you. We would love working with you, but we want you working in visual effects. And as a part of my experience working in the 3D DMP Academy and Environments Academy in Montreal, like the people that I've worked with, many of them are now senior level artists and leads in the VFX industry. So it's hugely rewarding for me as an individual to be able to see you get your job and into the industry. And I believe that the incentives that I'm outlining here for this reverse scholarship thing is the right kind of incentives. Okay, so let's just go over some of the subscription. So like I said, the whole goal is to get you a demo reel. When you get through the program, you get a demo reel. And then the confidence to thrive when you are done. So let's break this down. So this is what's included in the VFX Horde training subscription. You have Milestones, which is including master courses and sequence training. Like I said, includes film footage, track cameras, 3D models, etc. The software that you will have access to is Nuke and Maya. That is a full license on node-locked license to your workstation that you will have access to while you're in the program. You will also have opportunity for feedback and quality control, and so that's done in monthly and rounds. So monthlies is like dailies. If you've ever been a part of a visual effects studio or heard of what dailies are, that's like where your lead sits down with the crew and looks at everybody's work and says, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be fixed, take this back, fix this one thing, and then we're going to final this. And that's where the finaling of shots and tasks happen, is in monthlies and in rounds. So monthlies is the live feedback sessions that we would have. And so you would be a part of these live feedback sessions in monthlies. And in rounds is the written portion of that feedback. And so when you submit something to the review room, there's a comments box where you get to get feedback on your shots and say, it's too dark over here, replace this, blah, 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 whatever feedback. And then you make those changes and then you resubmit. So that's kind of the foundation of some of the feedback there. So you have access to monthlies and rounds. You have breakout training sessions. And so your lead will be able to kind of get the pulse of what's going on with the group and say, everybody's kind of struggling with some of this concept work. And so I'm going to do a special breakout training session. I'm going to grab somebody's shot or something that somebody's having a hard time with, and I'm going to do a bit of a demo, and I'm going to show people how to overcome some of these issues. You have access to a support forum. So if you're like, I don't know how to do this in Maya, or how do I do this or this? You have access to a support forum where you can ask some more technical questions. Because like I said, the whole thing with the VFX Horde is that it's simulating a VFX studio. So you have all of the components there. You have your sequence, you have all of your assets, you have a pipeline, you have a color workflow, you have the review room where you're getting feedback. So all the elements are there. and support forum is going to be a part of that. The community group, you'll have access to the community group where everybody can come together, and you get to pool all of the people in your community. So it's a private community. Everybody that's in the program can be a part of it, and you can leverage everybody in the community and all of their knowledge. And so you're like, I'm having a trouble with it. The idea is that everybody's going to be in different milestones. And so you have one person that is more advanced than other people, or you're more advanced than other people, or new people are coming in, then the people that are just coming in are be like, hey, how did you handle this problem? Older, people that have been here for a while can say, hey, this is how I handled it. Or you can get help from other people that are more advanced than you. So I do want to just quickly make a comparison, because if you have been following the VFX Horde, then you know that there is a career advancement program, and this is different than the career advancement program. So let me just draw a parallel for you here. There's graduates. The training subscription model is for graduates or people that are near graduation, so people that haven't gotten into visual effects yet. It's a monthly subscription, and it has all those benefits that we just talked about, okay? The career advancement program is a bit different. It's for visual effects professionals. You make an upfront payment, or you make 3 payments on a program. It's like a one-on-one mentorship program, basically. You have a private community group that's just for them. You have, you work with your lead to develop a personalized growth plan. You have direct access to your lead to ask him any questions, and you have open access to all of the training material, as opposed to Milestones. And it has flexible scheduling. So it's a bit different as far as the way that it's implemented, and it's really there for people that are like juniors and want to fill in their skill and knowledge gaps in order to be a mid-level artist, or for people that are switching. So like you're in layout and you want to become a matte painter, you're a compositor and want to become an effects artist. So people have the ability to switch disciplines. So I'm just kind of just drawing some differences between those programs. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, I want to be able to just kind of share some concepts with you as we're ending here. And it's this idea that, and I'm going to use a baking analogy here. And it's this idea that if you want to make something, then you pull specifically from certain ingredients, okay? And in this cake, we're making a strawberry cake. And for this strawberry cake, you have to be able to pick the right ingredients. And it's the ingredients that come together that makes something palatable, that makes it what it is. And if you only pull a couple of those ingredients, then you're not really getting the strawberry cake, right? It's just not the same. So you have to, not only do you have to have the right ingredients, they have to be in the right portions, they have to be put together the right way, right, in order to get the thing that you want, okay? So I want you guys to think about this idea or this analogy of ingredients and how it applies to your demo reel. Because when we're talking about milestones are the ingredients that need to be put together that makes you the discipline that you want to be. If you're an effects artist, it's going to make you the effects artist you want to be. If it's going to be the DMP artist, it's going to be the DMP artist you want to be, okay? If you have different elements that you're putting into this cake, you're like, I think that we should put hot sauce in this cake, then you're not really going to get a very good strawberry cake, right? You have to be able to take the right ingredients to make the cake. And in this case, we're talking about the demo reel for 3D DMP. You have to have the right elements that are going to come together that's going to make the right kind of demo reel, right? Otherwise, you get something else. So let me just kind of have a scenario here for you. you are able to get an interview, and either you have had a really fragmented education and you don't and you don't have all the right ingredients on your demo reel, or you maybe you've stuck with the VFX Horde, you got a couple of milestones through, but you haven't finished, and so you put your reel out there and you present it to people, and you're like, look at this beautiful strawberry 3D DMP cake, right? And the employer comes back and says, actually, I don't see a beautiful cake. I see something different. And you're like, but I have all of this. I use these ingredients. And then they would say, well, you're actually missing these ingredients. And they say, well, I'm sorry, try again. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I should have stuck with the VFX Horde, because those same things that your employer is saying that you're missing on your demo reel are exactly the things that are the milestones in the VFX Horde. So the idea here is that there's missing, if you have missing ingredients, it's going to make a bad reel. And who, and the question here is like, who is setting the standards for what the ingredients are that goes into these demo reels? Because it's not the VFX Horde, and I need to make this clear, the VFX Horde is not making the standards. It's the VFX industry makes the standards. And so you have this wall, there's this wall that's been created that prevents just anybody getting into visual effects studios, and these are the standards for these particular disciplines. VFX Horde does not create them, the VFX industry does. And so you have a choice of how you're going to interact with that wall, because the wall exists. So you could keep going to VFX Studio's doors and you could keep banging your head against it, or you could come to the VFX Horde, make it through your milestones, and then be able to scale that wall when you get to those visual effects studios. But you have to deal with that wall. The wall is not going to go away, okay? And I do want to make just a little bit of because the argument here that you could counter with that is that, but I hear about all these people, they just get, maybe they're not qualified, but they just kind of have this chance and they just get swept away by the VFX industry. And so what I call those rogue waves, and it's this idea, and if you know anything about a rogue wave, it's this idea that you have these waves that are completely random, and they just kind of appear, like you're on a boat or on the shore or something. It's this massive wave that just comes up, and there's no other waves. It's just totally bizarre and statistically very rare, right? So I feel like that's a pretty good comparison to how people get into the visual effects industry, is that they're just standing there, and then all of a sudden they just get swept into the VFX industry, right? And there's a couple of problems with this idea of relying on the rogue wave. And the rogue wave is great in that, you know, it will get you in the industry. The bad thing is that it's a bit of a waiting game, right? And maybe there's people here that have been waiting for the rogue wave to happen, right? You've just been sitting there and you're like, okay, sometime it's going to be showing up anytime now, right? So it's a really agonizing waiting game. But there's some aspects to the rogue wave that maybe you haven't considered. So I'm gonna explain this. So let's say you get into the VFX industry via a rogue wave, not based on merits or skill level, but you just provided this opportunity. Maybe you were kind of subpar and you got in the visual effects industry. That's great. You got your first job. You move to one of these film hubs in the VFX industry. You're working in the industry, and your contract ends. And you're like, sweet, I did awesome on my first job. I got in the VFX industry. Now it's time for me to look for my second job. But with every wave, there is a trough, okay? So that is the deep part at the end of the wave, right? After the wave has come up. And that's kind of where your second job sits, because something happens between your first and second job, and that's where you have all of this work that you want to put on a demo reel that's going to get you your second job. Because your first job was this rogue wave, right? You can't really rely on a rogue wave of happening again and again and again. You have to be able to show work so that you earn your next job, right? And so you're kind of in this position where you need to put it on your reel, but the film that you worked on isn't out yet. And so you can't put it on your reel. And not only is it not out yet, but it's like it also has to go to DVD before you can put it on your demo reel. So now you're in a position where you're like 3 to 5 months out of your film being released. You can't put it on your demo reel. And you're sitting in one of the most expensive cities in the world trying to make it by and trying to wait around for maybe another rogue wave to happen and to get you a second job, right? And so this is very common, and this is one of those things that's just not considered by people when they're talking about getting into the film industry. So not only do rogue waves don't happen very often, but they're a bit treacherous in that you have the trough that follows right after the rogue wave, and you have to be able to know how to maneuver that. So a lot of people don't think about that. Another aspect of these rogue waves is the direction of the rogue wave, right? Because they're random. And you may have a plan for yourself and you say, this is where I want to be. And this happens to a lot of people in the visual effects industry. They find out that they got caught up in one of these rogue waves and it's taken them farther out to sea, and they find that that's not where they want to be, okay? And so if you are going to do the rogue wave path, then you are at the mercy of the path of the rogue wave, and it's going to take you wherever it's going to take you. And that can be hard. You can swim against the current and you could get where you want to go, but it's very difficult, right? Because when you get a job at a visual effects studio, a lot of times you're locked into that position. And if you want to be a matte painter and you get a job doing roto, then you are pretty well stuck in roto until you can break out of that position into something else. And so that's kind of a difficult thing, okay? So what I'm proposing to you is that your demo reel is actually a boat. If I can take this analogy just a little bit farther, it's this idea that if you have a boat, then it has the ability to steer, and you can actually point it in the direction that you want to go, okay? And if you do have a boat, it sits on top of the waves, and it has the ability, not that it's completely perfect, but it has the ability to weather a lot more of the storm than you would if you're just out in open water, okay? So the boat sits on top of the waves. You can get through much, much better this trough period that happens, and you can point in the direction that you want to go. And so that's how I want you to be thinking about your demo reel and how you're going to be transitioning into a VFX career. Think about it. It's all about the demo reel. It's all about the demo reel, okay?